In the spring of 2019, 43 people died in just 6 weeks. Not in a war zone, not in a natural disaster, but in the waters between two nations teetering on the edge of confrontation. The United States Navy had arrived in the Caribbean, and Venezuela's government declared a state of emergency. What you're about to hear isn't about invasion or military conquest. It's about something far more complex, more tragic, and largely forgotten by the world. This is the story of Operation Enhanced Counter-Narcotics, where the fight against drug trafficking collided with geopolitics, desperation, and human life. To understand what happened in those 6 weeks, you need to understand Venezuela in 2019. The country was collapsing. Hyperinflation had destroyed the economy. Millions were fleeing across borders. Food and medicine were scarce. And in the midst of this chaos, the Maduro government faced mounting international pressure, with the United States backing opposition leader Juan Guaidó as interim president. But there was another dimension to this crisis: drugs. Venezuela had become a major transshipment hub for Colombian cocaine heading to the United States and Europe. With state institutions crumbling, criminal organizations and even some elements within the Venezuelan military were allegedly facilitating the drug trade. The United States estimated that hundreds of tons of cocaine were moving through Venezuelan territory and waters annually. In April 2019, the Trump administration announced Operation Enhanced Counter-Narcotics, deploying Navy destroyers, Coast Guard cutters, surveillance aircraft, and special operations forces to the Caribbean. The stated mission: intercept drug smugglers. The reality on the water would prove far more complicated. The USS Lassen, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, was one of several warships patrolling the approaches to Venezuela. Equipped with advanced radar systems and helicopters, these vessels could detect small craft from miles away. The rules of engagement were clear: identify suspected smuggling vessels, pursue, and interdict. But the people operating these small boats weren't always cartel operatives with military-grade weapons. Many were fishermen, desperate Venezuelans trying to survive, or low-level couriers who saw no other economic option. The distinction wasn't always clear from a destroyer's bridge. On the night of April 23rd, a Navy helicopter detected a fast-moving vessel 60 miles north of Venezuelan coast. No lights, erratic course, classic smuggler behavior. The pursuit began. What happened next depends on who tells the story. According to U.S. Navy reports, the vessel refused to stop despite warning shots and continued evasive maneuvers at high speed. The boat eventually capsized in rough seas. 4 people drowned before rescue crews could reach them. Venezuelan officials claimed the boat was filled with fishermen, not smugglers. They said the Navy's aggressive pursuit caused the deaths. The U.S. maintained that significant quantities of cocaine were recovered, justifying the interdiction. The truth, as often happens at sea, went down with the waves. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next 5 weeks, similar encounters occurred with disturbing frequency. May 3rd, 3 dead after a chase ended in a collision. May 17th, 6 people lost when a boat caught fire during an interdiction attempt. The Venezuelan government accused the United States of operating with impunity in international waters, hunting their citizens like criminals. The U.S. Southern Command defended the operations, releasing statistics. Over 20 tons of cocaine seized, dozens of suspected smugglers detained, major drug routes disrupted. But they also acknowledged the deaths, calling them tragic but unavoidable consequences of criminals resisting lawful interdiction. On the water, the calculus was brutal. Small boats loaded with drugs would often scatter their cargo and flee at speeds exceeding 50 knots. Navy crews faced split-second decisions: pursue aggressively and risk capsizing the boat, or let them escape and allow drugs to reach American streets. There were no good options, only varying degrees of bad outcomes. The deadliest single incident occurred on May 28th. A Navy boarding team approached a suspected smuggling vessel in the pre-dawn darkness. As the team drew close, the smugglers allegedly began throwing packages overboard, and the boat suddenly accelerated. In the chaos, the small craft struck a wave at full throttle and broke apart. 13 people were in the water. Only 4 survived. Venezuelan media broadcast images of weeping families, fishing villages emptied of men, and government officials demanding the United States cease operations immediately. The Pentagon watched nervously. An armed confrontation between Venezuelan and American naval forces could spark an international crisis neither side wanted. Behind closed doors, military planners gamed out scenarios. What if a Venezuelan patrol boat fired on a U.S. destroyer? What if American aircraft were targeted? The region suddenly felt dangerously combustible. By mid-June, the death toll stood at 43. The United States quietly scaled back the most aggressive interdiction tactics. Patrols continued, but with modified rules of engagement emphasizing de-escalation. The Venezuelan government's emergency declaration became a diplomatic tool used in international forums to condemn American imperialism while deflecting attention from its own failures. The broader Counter-Narcotics campaign continued throughout 2019 and beyond, but the 6 weeks period in spring became a case study of the unintended consequences of militarized drug enforcement. Navy officers who participated in the operations later spoke off the record about the moral weight of those weeks. They had followed orders, executed their mission, and achieved quantifiable results, but the cost in human lives haunted many of them. For the families of those who died, there was no closure. Venezuelan authorities couldn't or wouldn't pursue justice against a foreign military. American officials maintained legal immunity under international maritime law. The dead became statistics in competing narratives, drug criminals or economic refugees, depending on which government was speaking. The cocaine kept flowing. Studies later showed that while Operation Enhanced Counter-Narcotics disrupted some drug trafficking routes, the drug trade adapted within months. New routes emerged. Different criminal organizations took over. The fundamental dynamics, poverty in Latin America and demand in the United States, remained unchanged. What did change was the relationship between the two nations. Any possibility of diplomatic reconciliation became more remote. The deaths hardened Venezuelan public opinion against the United States, giving the Maduro government a powerful propaganda victory. American policymakers, meanwhile, grew more convinced that Venezuela under Maduro was a threat to regional security. The story of those 43 deaths asks uncomfortable questions that remain unanswered. Can military force solve problems rooted in economics and social collapse? When does aggressive enforcement cross the line into recklessness? And who bears responsibility when missions designed to save lives end up taking them? The U.S. Navy personnel involved weren't villains. They were professionals executing a mission in an impossible situation. The people on those boats weren't all angels, but many were simply desperate. The real tragedy is that systemic failures, corruption, failed drug policies, and economic devastation created circumstances where such encounters became inevitable. Today, those 6 weeks in 2019 are largely forgotten. The news cycle moved on. Venezuela's crisis deepened further. The drug war continued. But in fishing villages along the Venezuelan coast, families still wait for men who will never return. And on Navy ships somewhere in the Caribbean, sailors still scan the horizon for small boats in the darkness, knowing that the next interdiction might end in another tragedy. This is the cost of policy executed at sea, where geopolitics meets human desperation, and where 43 deaths in 6 weeks became a footnote in the endless war on drugs. The question we should ask ourselves is, was it worth it? And the honest answer is, we may never know.